Hey crew, Coach Josh here with GarageGangGyms.com, and today I'm going to help you get your first push-up. So our first step in you conquering your push-up is to figure out what the heck is going on with your body first. So what we want to talk about is shoulders, hands, position, all kinds of things. And before we even show you how to do your first push-up, I want you to think, I need to make every single one of these perfect. So you're gonna see me doing 5 at a time because that's usually what my clients are able to do, stay focused on and do really well so that their technique stays good. If you're able to do 8, that's fantastic. If it's 10, it might not be hard enough for you to challenge yourself technique-wise. Now, I really want you guys to practice this 2 to 3 times a week, maybe 4 to 5 rounds, and again, never taking it into the point where your form starts to deviate, at least in these first few weeks. As we get better at push-ups, absolutely you can start really pushing it. But as we're learning, every time you deviate, you're starting to learn bad habits, and you're always gonna fall into your most comfortable technique, which is always something that we don't necessarily want, right? Our hips are gonna drop, we're gonna be in a bad position. So we always wanna make sure we're practicing perfect so that we have perfect practice and that we can always make sure we're doing these well. So here's what we're gonna do. With our arms, stick your arms out in front. At the bottom of our push-up, what we want is our thumbs to line up somewhere along our nipple line here. So for me, it's this zipper here you can see. Now, the width of your hands is gonna really be dependent on how wide your shoulders are and what's comfortable. If our hands are too narrow, we're gonna have a tendency to round. If our hands are too wide, we're gonna get into this awkward rotation in our shoulder and it's gonna hurt. For most people, I usually say stick your arms out straight in front of you and take your elbows and pull back. As soon as you pull back and keeping your chest nice and high, arms straight, pull back, that's usually gonna be a pretty good position. And do this in front of a mirror because some people have a tendency to get their neck involved and we want our neck to be relaxed. What this is gonna do is it's opening up our chest so that we can push away from it. Another way you could think about it is as if you're opening up for a big hug, right? You open up for that big hug, you get this good stretch. Now, with that in mind, let's talk about what the relationship between our arm and our hand is. So, more specifically, your shoulder. We want to keep your shoulders down, right, like I talked about. And as we pull our elbows back, you'll see that my shoulder, if I were in a push-up position, is actually in front of my hand. And that's usually where people go wrong when they're doing their push-up, is they have a tendency to go straight down and their hands come up by their face. And it'll look something like this. They'll go straight down. Their elbows kind of get cocky. Their arms are way out here because they're thinking down. What we want to be thinking about is, again, maximizing that stretch. So I'm going to aim my chest, whether it's for the bar or for the floor when you get to that point, aim my chest toward that object. And as I go down, the cue I want you to think about is go forward in front of your hands. So for your viewing purposes, think of this bar as where my hands are, right? So instead of looking at my hands, think about my shoulders in relation to this bar. So I'm gonna get set up, I'm gonna take a breath, and I'm gonna go forward in front of that bar. And I understand you can't see me when I do that. So that's the first step. We wanna figure out an object, whether it's an ottoman, maybe it's your kitchen table, maybe you're using folding chairs, but if you are using a chair, prop them up against a wall so that they're not moving around because you'd hate for them to tip on you. Again, the nice thing is if you're in a gym, when you use a squat rack, the cool thing is you can incrementally make this harder by lowering the bar. And that's what I do with my clients is we start on my rack is 15, and if they do really well, okay, we go to 14, 12, 10, whatever, and then we transition to the floor. Going from a really high angle right to the floor, even on your knees, there's such an intensity change that you may not be successful. So try to find at least a high object and then somewhere in between before you try to take it to the floor. So we want to go past our hands. Now, what else am I thinking about? The word is push up. Now, most people actually do what I refer to as a push back. What I mean by that is, as soon as they start pushing, they push themselves out of position. So it'll look something like this. They get down and then they push themselves away. And you can see how my hips have to kick back in order for me to do that. And why do you do it? Because number one, you get to shift your weight off of your chest, which for most people is actually uncomfortable to use in the first place. And secondly, it makes it a lot easier. By your hips coming up, your heels go down, you have this momentum drawing you back, and you really don't have to use your body to get yourself up. So I challenge you, as you're pushing, is to try to stay over your hands for as long as you can. So you're gonna wanna push up, then allow yourself to come back. So it'll look something like this. So I'm gonna push up, then back. Push up, then back. That way I keep my pecs on, I'm locking my elbows out and trying to get as much pec engagement as I can. So that's what's going on with the upper body. Now with the lower body, we wanna make sure, and I talk about this more when you're doing full push-ups later in this video, but we want your hips and your shoulders to go down at the same rate. And we want to really start thinking about that. The tendency for people is to let their hips drop or to keep their hips out of the way, because as soon as we line those hips up, and you can feel this just being in plank here, as soon as we line our hips up and our chest is over our hands, your arms start to burn, your chest starts to burn, and that's a good thing. So we want to take a good breath, hold our breath. This will help keep our hips in check, lower ourselves forward, pushing up and away, making sure our hips come with our hands. So hips and shoulders, hips and shoulders. Now, the last thing I'm doing, and you can't quite see it, is what I'm doing with my feet. I'm trying to keep my heels off of the ground because as I push, again, we talked about this, the tendency is for that heel to go down and my body to drift back, okay? So as I'm pushing up, I'm gonna try to keep my heels up so that I can stay over the bar better and longer. Now, once you're able to do, say, 4 sets of 5, 3 different days in a week, and I would recommend non-consecutive days, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, perhaps, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. There's nothing wrong with doing it every single day, but sometimes, especially when we're learning something new, we don't quite know when we're making mistakes. So let's say you are doing it Monday through Friday. By Thursday, you might be a little tired and not being aware of it. You could be creating all these bad habits that we just don't want to deal with. So I'd recommend, at least in your first 2 weeks, just 3 times, maybe a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Monday, Thursday, Saturday, whatever. Okay, but once you've got that down and it's no longer that challenging, now we need to start pegging it down. Again, if you're at a gym, you can just lower the rack down. And every time we make a change to the height, there's going to be something new we have to learn. And eventually, we're trying to learn as many lessons as we can before we take it to the floor, because if we don't learn those lessons, we have to somehow learn them on the ground when it's actually really hard. So let's move this bar down and reconvene. Okay, so I've lowered the bar quite a bit. In fact, I've lowered it 5 notches, and I wouldn't expect you to go from 15 down to 10. But if you do have a rack that you can go down to 14, 13, 12, each workout, maybe each week, you just try to move it a little peg, and again, every notch down, you have to learn something, and you're gonna find, oh, I have a bad habit of putting my heels down, pushing back, not getting deep enough, maybe I'm not going over my hands enough each time you go down, because every notch down is making it a little bit harder. Now, if you're going from, say, a kitchen counter to a folding chair, that can be a pretty big difference. So let's say you were doing sets of 12 on the kitchen counter, and again, I said after about 10, you wanna make a change, but let's say you're doing 12. Maybe when you're doing it on your new lower object, maybe you go back to doing 3 at a time. Maybe you do 8 sets of 3, right? So that you can have really good form and you're not limited by, oh, Josh told me I need to do 5, maybe 8, and I can only really do 3 good ones and then they get ugly. No, it's totally fine. These are just guidelines, right? So instead of doing 4 sets of 5, you do 8 sets of 3. You do 10 sets of 2. I don't care. I want them to be perfect. And in fact, when you do eventually get to the floor, let's say you can do 2 push-ups. Well, 3 sets of 2 might be all you can do today, but in the future, maybe you build it to 3 sets of 3, 4 sets of 2, 5 sets of 3, 4 sets of 5, 5 sets of 5, and now you're doing sets of 10 push-ups. But it's gonna take time. And there's gonna be a few workouts where you're gonna say to yourself, it's hard for me to even do 2. Good. Next time, maybe instead of doing, like I said, 3 sets of 2, you try to do 5 sets of 2. Well, you just added 4 total repetitions. And then the next time you try doing 3s. It's a progressive thing. And this goes for all of your strength exercises. We don't go from doing a body weight squat to putting the bar on our back to squatting a world record. There's a lot of steps in between. So again, with this push-up, all of our rules apply. I'm going to line up over my hands. I'm going to make sure I go over my hands as I do this push-up. I'm going to make sure I push up, then back. I'm going to try to keep my hips and my shoulders going down and coming up at the same pace. And I'm going to make sure that my heels stay up. So let's practice. Taking a breath, fall, push up and away. Fall, push up and away. Up and away. 3, 4, 5. Now, something that will start to happen as we get lower and lower and lower is your eyes are going to start looking lower and lower and lower. And this actually becomes a big problem when we're doing it on the floor, is if you're looking at the ground right under you, you're going to have a tendency to do something like this. Your head kind of gets in the way, and then you're not going to go as low. So this is one of those exercises you shouldn't need to see where you're going. You should feel where you're going. So what I want is for you to actually look forward a little bit. If you're on the floor, I usually tell people look, 2-3 feet out in front of you on the ground. That's going to take you from looking at your hands to looking about here, about 2-3 feet, again, down. You don't want to crank your neck and be looking forward. Then you're going to change all of your angles and positions. But for me, I'm looking at, and you can't see it, I'm looking at the corner behind my platform. So I'm just looking there, trying to keep my eyes on it. It keeps my neck in a good position because, again, I don't want to be looking down or looking up and straining it. I'm just setting a good angle and pushing up and away. Now, again, after a few weeks, you lower it down. After a few workouts or weeks, you lower it down. And once you get to the point where you're like, I can't lower the rack anymore, or wow, I can do 8 at the rack's lowest setting, or I just don't have any objects that go lower, and using books, trust me, is not very safe, maybe it's time you take it to the floor. So come with me to your first knee down push-up. All right, you guys have progressed all the way down. You're at a pretty low height. Maybe you don't have any other implement that you can actually get lower on your push-up. Now it's time to make you guys do knees down push-ups. Now, before you even get started, I've heard it 1,000 times. Oh, those are girl push-ups. No. This is a girl push-up where you just get into some arbitrary position and just start doing this thing. We still need to make sure all the rules that we talked about with the elevated push-ups are still at play here. So I'll remind you of those. We need to make sure we're going past our hands, just like we talked about on the bar. We need to make sure we're coming up, then back. Otherwise, it's a push back, not a push up. And what I really want you to do is make it as close to a full push-up as you can. So here's how we're going to do it. We're going to start in our high plank position. This is going to help us line up the right angles. So if I just barely set my knees down and keep my shoulders in place, my position with my upper body is virtually the same as it is with my legs in the air, right? So you can see high plank, low plank. This is our starting position. Then the same rules apply. My hands are relatively the same width as they were on the bar that we talked about earlier. Again, I'm moving forward and pushing myself up. So I get into a good starting position. I set my knees down. I'm going to take a good breath. I'm going to fall forward so that my elbows make that same position as we were talking about before. I'm going to push up and back, taking my breaths. And it's really important that you get all the way down, just like you were practicing when your legs were straight with whatever object that you were using. So then, once you're able to do sets of 5 on your knees like that, it should be no problem for you to get set and do at least 1 full push-up. Now, the tendency is as soon as we pop up onto our toes is we're going to forget that we need to go forward and we're going to try to go down into our push-up. And that's going to make things feel so awkward and weird when we're doing this. You're only going to feel your shoulders, maybe your neck. You're not going to feel your pecs. So we line up, we take a really good breath, and it's very important that your shoulders and your hips go down at the same rate. So what typically happens is people get into this beautiful position, take a good breath, and then because they know they're on their toes instead of their knees, they keep their hips into the air. Or worse, they let their hips drop too much. So it'll look something like this. They'll let their hips drop, and then they'll come down like this, and their belly will touch. So we need to make sure, and you can check yourself out in a mirror. You can film yourself like I am right now. And if you're filming yourself, send me that video. I will give you coaching cues so that you guys can do a better push-up. You guys can send those over to me on our Facebook group. I'll put a link in the description below. Please feel free to send me as many lifting videos as you want. The whole community can benefit from me coaching you specifically on how we can make your form better. So again, when we're doing these push-ups, we need to make sure hips and shoulders go down, hips and shoulders come up. Hips and shoulders go down, hips and shoulders come up. And there you have it, my friends, your first push-up. It's going to take time. You may not get it in your first week, your first month. In fact, it usually takes anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks if you've never done any pushing before, because it takes weeks of you twice a week doing those elevated push-ups we talked about earlier in order to just learn this new mechanic and just make it second nature so that when you are on the floor and struggling, because it should be a struggle, you don't have to think about, am I doing my push-up correctly? You can just focus on, take that breath, get into position, and crush my first push-up. So there you have it, guys. This was how to do your first push-up with me, Coach Josh, here at GarageGangGyms.com. Please check out that Facebook group. Leave a like and a comment down below if you have any questions. I'm here to help you guys. See you next time.